Bill Hewlett is a clinical services manager at Relationships Australia. He sat down with Dadology to talk about stay-at-home dads, the benefits of functional relationships, and how to manage that little creature that takes over your life.
Could start please by describing your role and how you do with the clinicians at Relationships Australia.
Okay, so I basically kind of keep an eye on the practice of the people who basically work for family relationship centres. They are places where you go if you're thinking of going to court to deal with a process in relation to separating with each other. Now if you want to go to court, you've got to come here first to get a certificate. And so we get a go at see if we can help people not take the court road, take a more harmonious, more friendly, more useful, happier, better for the children kind of road. And so we have 6 centres across Sydney and probably about 50 people who are working in those various centres. So I kind of oversee their practice, basically.
So my story is about stay-at-home dads. So I'll just start with asking you, why do men take the step to be a stay-at-home father? Why has there been an increase in that, do you think?
Well, I suppose one thing that's also been increasing is the amount of success in women in the workforce. Not that they've broken through the glass ceiling, but there's more and more women at university and they're probably earning more, and it makes sense perhaps for the one who's earning the most to stay at work and the one who's not earning as much to stay at home with the kids. So I think that's a common reason. Plus I think, the whole kind of gender stereotype thing is kind of breaking down a lot. At one point it wasn't very manly to stay at home with the kids, and now it's considered to be more and more acceptable. And a lot of women would rather go to work perhaps than stay at home. So, I think that a lot of stereotypes have softened and men are able to stay at home.
Yeah, do you think that this softening of stereotypes affects men in a positive way or a negative way?
I'd say entirely positive. I think in many ways, they used to say that men were defined by what they couldn't do. You can't do this, you can't be soft, you can't be, show signs of vulnerability. In many ways, men's roles are so much freer now than they used to be. You're allowed to be warm and fuzzy if you want, you're allowed to be emotional, you're allowed, because a lot of men, like, you think about, in the First World War, people came back from the First World War and never spoke about what happened because they didn't want to relive it. So they had this whole kind of thing, just hold it in, So I think really it's so much easier to be a man than it used to be. And so many different types of men, lots of different types of masculinity these days. So yeah, it's all good.
So from your work, do you see that having a positive effect on their relationships with perhaps their wife or their partner or with their children as well?
Well, definitely. The roles aren't as defined as they used to be. You used to have that thing where mum would be at home with the kids. Kids misbehaved and mum would say, wait till your dad gets home. So that's a horrible role for dads, to sort of come home and have to be the one to tell the kids off, So I think it's good for everyone. It's those roles, when they were so restrictive, they were very, everybody was worse off. Women were worse off, men were worse off, it's just so much, we're not as constrained as we used to be. Of course, there are downsides, I suppose. In many ways, maybe it was nicer to be a man who just came home and dinner was ready on the table, But no, I'd say in every respect it's good for the family, it's good for men, it's good for women, it's good for kids.
To have that parent around, a bit of a change, having both parents around sometimes.
Yeah.
So in terms of a man's health, is there any specifics that you can describe that helps a man's health? Is it like greater self-esteem or a growth in their ability to interact with their family? Is that something that you see in your work?
Yeah, I think we do. I think we see, as I say, these stereotypes kind of break down. We see men being more comfortable talking about how they feel. I mean, like historically, men might have some health problem and they won't go to the doctor, so they leave it. And by the time they do go to the doctor, it's too late, So all of these things are so much easier, and they can describe how they feel. Because, like, if you've got stuff going inside you that you haven't been able to resolve and you don't speak about it, it stays inside you. It stays going round and round, and you go over and over and you don't get anywhere. If you just speak about how you're feeling, it's half the problem has already been sort of resolved because you're talking about it. And as you're speaking about it, you think, oh, actually, I didn't know I felt like that, or someone else is helping you work out what you feel. So, you know, it's better for health, it's better for psychological, emotional. And of course, there's a lot of knowledge now about health too. People understand they shouldn't eat lots of sugar, they understand they shouldn't smoke cigarettes, they understand they shouldn't drink too much alcohol. And in the past, you know, women were the keepers of that information. They would be reading Women's Weekly and finding out about these health things, and men were not accessing that. So it's fantastic that they can find out about information that's useful, good for their health, good for their families, and to be comfortable with their emotions and to be open and warm and kind. And, you know, and the great thing about dads is historically what will happen if the family's sort of together, you know, dad's watching the kids are climbing trees and being very rough and pushing the boundaries, and mum's like not normally that keen to let them go that much. So when they're with the dad, they discover their strength, they discover their adventurousness, they discover that, you know, they can push boundaries. When they're with mum, they get this lovely sense of a warm, sort of caring concern, and it's soft and it's gentle and it's motherly. So really they need both. And if they get both and mum and dad are getting on really well with each other, they live in this glorious state of carefree, untroubled, which of course allows them to develop into great adults because they've just grown up in this lovely carefree environment. So the relationship between mum and dad is really, really important to the kids. It really matters a lot to them. So, you know, getting better and better understanding yourself, getting better and better understanding other people, it all goes well for everyone.
Sounds like it. Have you, in your work, dealt with any fathers who have postnatal depression?
Certainly met a few dads who are struggling after a baby's been born. I guess one thing that often happens, I don't know about postnatal depression. I think my understanding of postnatal depression has quite a lot to do with sort of hormonal process that occurs around childbirth, prior to, during and after childbirth. But a lot of dads really struggle when the baby comes along. For one thing, they're no longer the number one. You know, they're suddenly sharing, and if the relationship's not well constructed, if they haven't worked out how they're going to manage this, the dads can feel quite left out and quite unimportant, and suddenly, you know, like questioning the love. Of course, there's a new focus now. So it's not that the mum stopped loving the dad, it's just that she's now attending to something else. So some dads struggle with that, and it's about self-esteem, it's about understanding what's going on, rather than taking it personally and feeling hurt and offended, you know.
So do you think a dad who stays at home is able to overcome these feelings of being left out and in not being as involved with the family? Would that be a positive for him? And then it's like, does that make sense? And then
so if the dad stays at home, can he survive that, or can he be okay?
It's easier for him to overcome potential feelings of feeling left out.
Well, I think if he stays at home, maybe he won't feel left out. Maybe she'll feel left out because he'll be very focused on the kid. You know, interestingly, it's not about gender, it's more about the role. So when you speak to men who've stayed at home with the children, they actually suffer from the very same social isolation and sense of, well, you know, the world sort of closes in around you. You're no longer connected to the rest of the world because basically you're just at home with this demanding creature. You know, you've got enough time to make the coffee, but you don't have enough time to drink it. So they suffer from those classic kind of stuck at home kind of syndromes. So it's not really whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, it's more about what you're doing. So men who stay at home with the children, maybe they become very focused on the children. And of course, it's going to be tough for mum, because when the kids are upset, they're probably going to run to dad, which mum will find rather sort of, you know, hurtful. Just the same as they're used to living with mum, they get hurt, they get upset, they run to mum. Dad thinks, why do they always go to her? So it's just about what they're used to. So yeah, it's about the role rather than the gender, I think.
Could you describe the importance of relationships in making a new family work, like the construction of a relationship between a man and a woman, or like a partnership?
So when a child comes along,
yeah.
yeah. Well, it's certainly something you need to kind of watch out for, because it's the first big stressor that comes onto a marriage. So there's certain major significant events that happen in a relationship, and certainly the arrival of the child, the first child anyway, it's quite significant, because obviously things are changing dramatically. You go from 2 to 3, so you can't ride a motorbike anymore. Yeah, look, everything changes, and you've really got to be up for it and ready to it. The most important thing probably is to make sure that the lines of communication remain online, keep going, because if you stop talking and you sort of become quietly sort of unhappy or resentful, and you stop talking to each other and the communication dries up, that's when things can start to get difficult, because you might be privately feeling that the other person's, stopped caring about you as much as they did, but you're not saying it. They don't know you're thinking that, so they're just carrying on oblivious. You're hoping that they figured it out. You're really upset that they haven't. You get into a classic kind of syndrome. So a big pressure like a child coming along is going to change things, and you do need to be ready for it and make sure the relationship is prepared to facilitate a relationship continuing to work. Like for a lot of people, they might have a date night where the babysitter comes and they go out together and they stop being, mum and dad, and they go back to being partners. And it's important that that is maintained, because that is a definite stress point. It can be problematic that time.
Could you describe some of the programs that Relationships Australia runs to help with this? In my research, I was looking at a few of them. The survival skills for healthy families was one that I thought was quite interesting, or even programs that you're involved in yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot. We have programs that are designed to help dads perhaps to bond with the children, because, depending on their own kind of experience as children, they may not have learnt how to relate well to the children. So a bit of a sense that mum's a bit of a natural at it. She's probably ended up sort of mothering her sisters or brothers at some stage, or at least she's kind of aware, and men have kind of been a bit out of the loop with all that. So the children come along and they don't really know how to play with them. So sometimes it's good to come to a group process where you can actually learn how to play with the child. What you'll often find with dad is that he'll sit down with the kids with some Lego and he'll build the thing while the kid just sits there like, great, Dad. Because Dad, in his opinion, is playing with the children, but from the children's point of view, it's actually about Dad having fun with Lego rather than Dad having fun with the kids. So you actually need to teach them how to let the children sort of drive the process in many ways. So we might have a group process where we would watch a dad with a child and watch to see how he played with the child, and maybe sort of come along and have a little gentle sort of nudge about, do you think maybe you could just let the child have a little bit more control over playing? And of course the kids love that, because they love the fact that Dad's there, but they love the fact that Dad is kind of admiring the work that they're doing, the play that they're doing, and love the fact that Dad is watching them rather than leading it. So we have groups for that. We have groups for people who've just had a child, to make sure that that relationship's still wholesome and healthy, to make sure that the sense of affection and sense of commitment is still there, because a lot of the things that you used to have that indicated commitment might not be there anymore. You can't go out so much, you can't do the stuff you used to do, so we'd have a group process to make sure that we're onto that. We have group processes to make sure that people understand how different they are, because different people manage conflict in different ways. And again, before the child came along, it might have been, good enough, or things were getting on okay. Now there's some pressure. The fact that they do conflict differently starts to cause problems between them. So one person might be very goal-focused, very determined to sort of bring about something. The other person might be more relationship-focused, and that person's more likely to give in and acquiesce. And so after a while, they might start to feel a bit resentful about that. Like, why do you always get your way? Why do I never get my way? Of course, not realising that they've got different ways of dealing with different situations. So what we're doing is kind of helping them understand themselves more, helping them understand the other person more, so they know why that person's doing that thing. Oh, that's right. That's because for you, What matters to you is this. I'm not going to take that personally because I understand what makes you tick. I also know what makes me tick, so I need to communicate with you. You want to sort of indicate to me that, you know, you hold me in high regard. This is the sort of language that I resonate with. So it's often about helping people understand each other more and understand themselves more. So all of the groups, all of the processes kind of fundamentally attend to that. We're different.
Yeah.
And when we're under pressure, those differences can become problematic.
It's a very complex process.
Yes.
My gosh. And I mean, I think that's an obvious thing in relationships. People will write songs about them and write books about them. And it's an incredibly complex process, especially with as you said, a little creature that's coming to the world.
Kids come along, definitely.
Do you find that dads will choose to stay at home because they want to stay at home, or because it's more a financial decision?
Some love to stay at home. You know, some dads are more into parenting than some mums. You know, like I think historically in the past there was always an assumption that the mother was better at raising the children or wanted more to have. I think that was about conditioning. So now that the conditioning is not as rigorous or as singular, you know, there's a lot of dads really good with kids and a lot of mums rather go to work. So it's not just about money, it's about naturally both doing what you'd ideally like to do. And it's not as if it's an absolute thing where the dad is, you know, at home all the time and the mum is never at home with them. People are coming to very sophisticated arrangements. Lots of people maybe split the week in half. So they'll both work part-time, they'll both spend lots of time with the kids, and they'll both get out and work, you know, which is probably not a bad thing, because I think if you just, you know, do one thing all the time and you don't have a break from it, regardless of how wonderful it is and how much you love your kids, you know, a bit of variety is not a bad thing. And also, both people will get to understand what it feels like to be at the beck and call of a 2-year-old tyrant, you know, who's basically ruining your life, running your life. And yeah, I think if you both understand what that's like, then you'll have a lot more empathy and sympathy for each other. You know, when you get home, you've been at work, you've been talking all day, you don't want to talk anymore, because the person who's been at home, all they've had to talk to is someone who just basically blows the raspberries and gurgles. So they're itching to talk to someone. So, you know, being aware of that, taking into account the other person's experience, helps to make sure that this time, which is incredibly important for the child, it's very, very important for the child that they get a sense that mum and dad are okay with each other. They can be deeply concerned and undone by a sense that things are not okay between mum and dad. It tells them in a really primary way that they're not safe. If you go back to our ancestors, if mum and dad weren't getting on with each other, you would be in danger, serious danger. Now obviously society is not as dangerous a place anymore, but nonetheless the children are wired to be very interested and concerned about how things are between mum and dad. So mum and dad's relationship is really, really important. And we need to make sure mum and dad are resourced to know what to look out for, how to maintain processes to keep themselves feeling close, how to do stuff that the other person knows is an indication of goodwill and that they matter. Keep those really important things going, particularly while the child is in those early stages of development. Because if they're troubled by what they're seeing in terms of what's going on between mum and dad, it impacts on their development. They actually suffer the consequences of that later on. They won't understand relationships particularly well themselves. They'll have this sense of nervousness when certain issues come up. They'll jump to conclusions about, you know, the meaning that someone else is making. If someone's saying something, they'll jump to a conclusion, oh, you're having a go at me, or you're criticising me. So they don't really understand relationships that well. So it's very important that mum and dad get on as well as possible with each other, even if they've separated. So when the kid kind of looks at mum and dad, they get a sense, oh, these two seem to be okay. So I, as a kid, will just relax, and I'll do my own development in this carefree way, knowing that things are okay, and they'll look after me. If they need to unite to look after me, I've got a strong sense that will happen. So we have to try really, really hard to make sure at this very, very important point in the child's development we do as much as we can to keep mum and dad feeling okay in each other's company and feeling that the other is concerned and cares for them and is interested in them, and you know, because there's pressure on at that point. It's unfortunate, really, in a way that the most important time for mum and dad to get on is when the child comes along, and it's also the hardest time to get along. So the pressure's on, but you know, if they can do that, children develop well, they go off and have great relationships themselves as a result of mum and dad being able to stay friendly or warm, or regardless of whether they're together or not.
Do you deal with many single dads at Relationships Australia?
Yeah, sure, we see loads.
And is the way that they have, like, they obviously by themselves, so they'll parent the child by themselves. Is there any differences that you find in the way that they are within themselves, or
A way that a single dad parents, or a way that, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and like how does that affect the child in any particular way?
Mm.
Or, does it affect them personally in any particular way?
You know, I suppose that the way that we parent is kind of learnt by how we were parented, which can be problematic, because if two people get together and they parent in different ways and they haven't got a good way to discuss it, things can get difficult. So it's not really a case of whether you're a single dad or whether you're a dad in a relationship. You'll parent the way that you learn to parent in many ways. Some parents are incredibly good at being very tuned into the children. They have a strong sense of what the children need and a strong sense of how to interact with the child in a way that makes the child feel very much the focus of their attention. It doesn't mean they sort of hover over them like a helicopter, sort of, you know, worrying about every move, but a very strong sense that the child gets of my dad really gets me, my dad knows exactly where I am, my dad knows exactly how I'm feeling. And if I have a need, he will respond in a way that feels really appropriate. So it's not so much a case of whether they're single or not. It's more a case of, do they have that attunement? Do they have that capacity to understand the experience of a child? Do they have the capacity to respond in a way that feels completely appropriate to the child, so the child always feels very safe in the knowledge that whatever happens, my dad will anticipate it. He'll meet that need before it even becomes an issue for me. I'll just toddle through life, assuming everything's fine, because I've got this lovely paternal gaze on me. So yeah, it's not, I mean, obviously if someone's a single dad and things aren't going well and he's worried about money, or, well, obviously that's going to impact on his parenting. So I suppose, you know, if you are in a relationship and that's providing financial security and, I don't know, just a general sense of things being okay, well, then you're going to be more able to parent, you know, at a sort of higher level. But really it comes down to the individual regardless of their circumstances.